I think that what we're finding is that those of us that have been around a while think of things in traditional sense, whereas today people watch content on anything from anywhere, and they don't look at it as linearly as we used to. There was appointment television where we watched this program on this time at that date. That's gone out the window, and half the time you don't even know what channel you're watching.
AI is something that, particularly in the world that we live in, has so many varied aspects. It doesn't matter whether it's the image processing side, which is what's terrified a lot of people, or the mimicry side, which is what the unions were arguing about. We don't talk about AI and how it's used for data management or cloud management, or how it's used for compression algorithms from the manufacturers. Now we can actually use the technology that learns on its own failures on how to build better tools.
Then there is, of course, the AI side of things as well. And that is becoming a production assistant. I like to think of AI as the other person in the control room with me that is actually building out the show and producing it live with me, because so many of the systems that we're using today have AI as a backend on machine learning to be able to take all these complex processes and make them simple, but also on the generative side for being able to turn me as a single producer into somebody who can take my script and turn it into something that works for the television news or also for social media channels very, very quickly.
Well, the future for NexSan, as well as the future for M&A, is the amount of data and how quickly it's grown. Just 4 or 5 years ago, a very large enterprise would be anywhere from 500 terabytes to a petabyte and a half. Just in the last 60 days, I have had 2 20 petabyte deals that have closed. And when you think about that, I'm going to age myself. I used to go to Comdex, and I was a NexSan reseller back in those days. And I'll never forget walking into Comdex, and they had 10 units in a rack, and I think the drives were 265 gigs each. And on the top it said 250 terabytes in one rack, tape is dead, right? Now I'm selling 22 terabyte drives in a 78 bay tray. So I'm giving somebody 1.5 petabytes in 4 inches. You know, it's amazing what has happened. And that's the change, the amount of data people have to hold.
I think the biggest one is a little bit of that decentralization that's happening not only at the largest media organizations, who increasingly are operating at a production level basis. They're not all centralized. Used to have the NBC 30 Rock and everything happened in the one building. It definitely doesn't work like that anymore. So that decentralization is also creating pools of talent in areas like, just for example, the creator economy. Some of the YouTubers have many petabytes of material, and we know because we're working with some of them, you know, that would put a traditional production to shame. So if you really look at it, take a step back, more and more video is being shot and edited for non-traditional purposes in this distributed way. And as a result, the fraction that is traditional broadcast and movies is shrinking, even though those industries are largely flat. It's just that everything else is growing so much faster that it puts it to shame.
But as we move farther and farther to in-camera visual effects, the use of Unreal Engine as a background for film and television production.
One of the things that we're seeing a lot of is remote prompting. So taking a prompter outside of the studio, especially because of COVID, talent was doing it out of their house, and being able to connect that teleprompter back to the studio as if it was in the same area.
I think there is an inevitable move for that production space to move to compute rather than being appliance-based. I mean, people still like tactile control surfaces, and so I think there's going to be elements of hardware that are still involved in that production space, but more and more of the production elements are going to be in compute. Now, that's going to be a mixture of on-prem compute that's owned by the content producer, and then effectively scaling up using public cloud infrastructure.
We have not actually changed the way we deliver audio. So what we expect is that you're going to see a push now for more delivery of, this next generation audio to the consumer devices that can then render them for a very personalized experience for the person who's actually consuming that content.
It's a lot more independent production. Even the large broadcasters, especially in Europe, are buying productions that are created cheaper and by independent companies. And the trend has been going stronger and stronger over the year.
There is a market below it, and I think that you're going to see more companies facing editors from foreign countries trying to edit things for less amount of money. And again, I'm not sure what the product is going to be like, but that's a definite reality of what's going on right now.
Corporate is a really big focus for us right now. Corporate being, again, anyone that needs to communicate leveraging video. Education's another one. Universities and educators are saying, how can we empower our students to learn the technology so when they leave school or they go into the workplace, they already know the solutions that are kind of out there right now. So whether they go into corporate environments or they go into live production environments or even the broadcast studios like we have surrounding us in New York here.
I don't know if this is an industry thing, but we're seeing a lot of venture capitalists purchase up, manufacturers, that are, I think that's affecting technology. And I think it's a negative thing. I've seen quite a few of these companies go different directions, I think, where the technology can go, and it gets kind of pigeonholed where maybe investors want it to be. So that right now, I think, is a big deal in our marketplace, especially because you're getting investors into manufacturing or manufacturers that have a different agenda. And I think that is kind of hampering technology innovation right now for our industry.
People are looking for automation, but there isn't really anything that's pivoted, such as when the nonlinear wave happened in the early to mid 90s. That happened relatively quickly, and it was a very defined business model, and it was a very succinct cut. Now, really, things are all over the map, but the biggest trend I'm seeing is really Adobe and their AI integration with Firefly is just leaps and bounds pushing everything, and everyone's now trying to reconcile how they're building that business model. And the manufacturers that I talk to on the editorial side are very cautious about where does the creative start and where does the creative stop, and how do they not impact their core business. Trend number 2 that I'm seeing, and I mean, Los Angeles for the creative community is a borderline depression. We had a big run of content with the streamers, and everybody really threw the business in there, and it seemed like the golden age was going to continue forever, and then it just stopped because at the end of the day, economics drives everything, and if there's no cash to build that business, there's going to be contraction. And as always we've seen over the years, the studios will really ramp up and ramp down, and there's no real gradual fit.
There's this huge expectation in terms of the quality of the content we produce these days. Everybody's expected it to be top of the line, but I've got somebody who hasn't spent 20 years learning how to do that, who's tasked with providing this. Or I've got in an environment where I've got regular turnover in talent, and how do I adapt to that? Somehow we've got to make that equipment simpler, easier to use, easier to configure, and yet still deliver that kind of quality product that people are looking for. It's one of the things we're actually introducing here is a lot of automation that does simple things like, can I put a camera on you and have it frame automatically, so that your head is positioned in the camera without having to have somebody manually adjust that. It's basic stuff like that, but it also expands to a much greater detail in terms of the overall workflow and how to make that simpler to use.
The idea that we're going to displace the mobile phone as a creative tool, I think is a little bit, hubris. I think that we have the most visually literate generation on Earth, right? We are in a current moment where people are making images in a way that I didn't even know we could make images, and they're all we all know what a good image looks like, I think that, however, even though we know what great images look like, we probably could stand to understand how and why they look so good. And as you kind of dive into learning about why images look great and what constitutes, technically speaking, a strong image, then that kind of opens up the door for wanting to sculpt and shape that image a little bit more. And I think as you really want to develop a voice, visually speaking, and you want to be able to create impact with your images, the only way to really do that is with a camera.
Everything about this industry is innovation. How can we do things better? How can we do it more cost effectively? How can we do it more engagingly? And more so, how do we get people to watch for longer?
I would say that it's also a key for the agility of our modern day creators. You don't know what's going to happen next. You don't know what your needs are going to be after you're done with this particular project, and so therefore this is ideal to at least get started out to try something new.